Today's learning target is I can convert between mixed numbers and improper fractions. Why do you need to convert between mixed numbers and improper fractions? Well, sometimes when you're working with a fraction problem, converting the fraction makes it easier to work with or easier to solve. The first thing that we're going to do is a basic vocabulary review of fractions. A fraction shows a part of a whole. For example, the fraction 2/3 tells us that we have 3 parts, and I want to represent 2 of them. So this is the fraction representation for 2/3. A fraction has a numerator and a denominator. The bar in the middle is called a fraction bar. When a fraction has a smaller number on top and a larger number on bottom, it is called a proper fraction. The numerator tells us how many pieces that we're representing. The denominator tells us how many pieces are in the whole. Now, sometimes we won't have a proper fraction. Sometimes we'll have an improper fraction. So with an improper fraction, it is a larger number on the top and a smaller number on the bottom. Our numerator is still the top number. Our denominator is still the bottom number, but this time we have more pieces than it takes to make a whole. For example, if we're talking about halves, I know that it takes 2 halves to make a whole, but this fraction tells us we have 3 halves. So this is what that looks like with a picture. There are more pieces than it takes to make one whole. We can convert an improper fraction to a mixed number by putting those parts together to make a whole with some parts left over. For example, if I use this picture, I put 2 parts together to make one whole, and then I have 1/2 left over. This is called a mixed number. A mixed number has a whole number and a fractional part. What is important to understand is that just because we change the way that we show the fractions and the mixed number doesn't mean we've changed the amount. The quantity is still equivalent or the same. 3 halves is equal to 1 and 1/2. So just because I converted between improper fractions and mixed numbers, it doesn't mean that they're not equivalent. They are equivalent. It's still the same amount. I didn't add or take away any of our halves. I just changed the way that we showed them. 3 halves may look like this, and 1 and 1/2 looks like this. So we've just arranged them in a different way. Okay, so now that we have some basic vocabulary, now we're going to move on to converting between improper fractions and whole numbers. What I have on the screen is 2 whole and 2/3. So I have the mixed number 2 and 2/3. So if I'm looking at one whole, how many of these pieces would it take to make a whole? That's right, it would take 3. So if I were to put the 3 pieces up, it would look like this. And then I could do the same with the other whole. So what I've done is just laid on top the pieces that would make a whole. So how many thirds do we have all together? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So what we've just done is converted a mixed number to an improper fraction. You can also do this numerically with operations. When you added 3/3 and 3/3, it's just like saying 2 times 3/3. It's repeated addition. And then we had to add in, so 2 times 3/3 would be 6/3. Then we had to add in our 2/3 to that. So 6/3 plus 2/3 is 8/3. I know that a lot of you learned the shortcut way to do this as well. If you multiply your denominator times your whole number, 3 times 2 is 6, and then add in the numerator, 3 times 2 was 6, plus 2 is 8/3. Now let's work in the opposite way. What about this time we have a lot of parts and no whole? These pieces are 6. If we start to put the pieces together, well, let's first see how many pieces we have all together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we have 10/6. So we have an improper fraction. We know it's improper because the top, the numerator, is larger than the denominator. Now, if we start to put the pieces together, we see that we can make a whole. How many pieces does it take to make one whole if we have 6? It takes 6 pieces. Okay, so I took those 6 pieces and I put them together and it made one whole. And then I have some leftover 6. How many do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4. You've just converted an improper fraction to a mixed number. You can also do this numerically with operations. You took the fractional parts and you divided them up so that you could make a whole. So you said 10 parts, and I want to divide that into groups of 6. So if you divide, 6 will go into 10 one time. Remember, we made one whole. And then the remaining amount is your remainder. We had 4, 6 left over. So when you do this, the quotient becomes your whole number, The remainder becomes your numerator, and your denominator is what you were dividing by. It's also what was in your original fraction. So the whole number is 1. The numerator is your remainder, 4, and your denominator is still 6.